If you have ever played any extraction shooter game, either it's the Ark Raiders or Delta Force or Arena Breakout, you have probably experienced something interesting. You spawn into a raid, you are relaxed, you are running around looting buildings, checking containers, maybe taking a few fights, everything feels normal, right? Then all of a sudden you find something valuable. Maybe it's a red item that's worth more than everything else you're carrying combined. And almost instantly, your entire mindset changes. You stop sprinting, you start listening more carefully, every footstep sounds dangerous, every bush looks suspicious, every gunshot makes you question whether you should keep looting or head straight to extraction. And here's the interesting part, guys. Nothing actually changed. You are still sitting in the same room, you are still playing the same game. But your brain suddenly starts acting like something important is at stake. That's because extraction shooters are built around some of the most powerful psychological systems in the human brain. In fact, many of the emotions you feel while playing extraction shooter games can be explained by decades of neuroscience and psychology research. And once you understand how these systems work, you will never look at extraction shooters the same way again. The first thing we need to talk about is dopamine. You have probably heard dopamine described as the brain's reward chemical. For many years, scientists believed dopamine was mostly about receiving rewards. You get something good, your brain releases dopamine, you feel good. Simple, right? But in the early 2000s, neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz, if I pronounce his name correctly, discovered something that completely changed how researchers think about dopamine. His studies showed that dopamine isn't just activated by rewards, it's heavily involved in anticipation. More specifically, dopamine becomes active when the brain is trying to predict whether a reward is coming or not, and one of the strongest triggers for that system is uncertainty. Think about that for a second. Your brain doesn't just enjoy rewards, your brain enjoys not knowing if a reward is coming. And that's exactly what extraction shooter games are built around. Every raid begins with uncertainty. You don't know what loot you will find, you don't know where other players are, you don't know if you will survive, and you definitely don't know if at the next room you will hit the jackpot or you will lose everything. The entire experience is built on unpredictability. And according to Schultz's research, uncertainty can create powerful dopamine responses because your brain becomes obsessed with predicting what happens next. That's why opening a random container can feel exciting, not because you already got something valuable, but because your brain knows there is a chance you might get something valuable out of it. That possibility is enough to keep your attention locked in. This is one reason extraction shooters feel so different from traditional multiplayer shooters. In a normal shooter, most matches follow a similar pattern. You spawn, you fight, you die, you respawn. There is nothing else. The stakes are so low. The outcome doesn't matter very much. You just don't care because you respawn and you have lost nothing. But extraction shooter games doesn't work like that. Every raid feels like a different journey. You might leave way richer than you have ever been, or you might lose everything in the first 3 minutes. And because you never know which outcome is waiting for you, your brain stays engaged the entire time. But hear me out. Uncertainty is only half of the story. The second psychological system is arguably even more powerful. It's the loss aversion. In 1979, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, excuse my pronunciation, introduced one of the most influential theories in modern psychology. It's called prospect theory, and one of its biggest discoveries is surprisingly simple. Humans hate losing things, and everyone can agree on this one. More specifically, losing something feels way worse than gaining the exact same thing feels good. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone gives you $100, okay? You would probably feel pretty happy. Now imagine someone takes $100 from you. Most people feel much worse losing the money than they felt gaining it. You see that the emotional impact is not equal. Losing something hurts more than gaining the same thing. Researchers often summarize this idea with a famous phrase: losses loom larger than gains, which is the core principle of the loss aversion. Think about a typical raid. At the beginning you have almost nothing, maybe a basic weapon, maybe some cheap armor, maybe a few healing items. At that point taking risks feels easy, there is not much to lose. But then the raid continues. You find valuable loot, you win a gunfight, you take another player's gear, your backpack is full of loot now, and suddenly something interesting happens. Your brain starts treating those items as if they already belong to you. Even though you haven't extracted yet, even though you could lose everything in the next 30 seconds, psychologically, the loot already feels like yours. And once that happens, your goal changes. You are no longer trying to gain more, you are trying to avoid losing what you already have. This is why players often become more cautious as the raid progresses. The same person who aggressively pushed every single gunfight 10 minutes ago is now slowly checking corners and avoiding unnecessary fights. The gameplay changed because the psychology changed. Now there is something to protect, and humans are incredibly motivated to protect what they already own. That's loss aversion in action. And extraction shooters constantly force players into a battle between greed and fear. I am pretty sure you've been in situations where your brain says, keep looting, there might be something even better ahead. But another brain part says, extract now, don't risk losing everything. That internal conflict is one of the reasons extraction shooters create such powerful emotions. The game constantly asks difficult questions. Should you take another fight? Should you visit one more loot location? Should you cross that open field, or should you extract immediately? And there is never a perfect answer. Every decision has its own risk and of course its own consequences. And you know what? Your brain knows it. What's fascinating is that this combination of uncertainty and loss aversion creates a psychological loop that it's so hard to forget. Think about the raid stories that you remember the most. They probably aren't the matches where everything went perfectly. They are the close calls, the near misses, the moments where you barely survived, the moments where you almost lost everything, or maybe you won a fight you should never have survived. Those moments sticks in your memory because they have emotional intensity, and emotional intensity is exactly what extraction shooters generate. They combine 5 different things into a single raid experience, and these are uncertainty, risk, anticipation, reward, and fear. That's why a successful extraction often feels more satisfying than winning an ordinary multiplayer match. It's not just about the loot, it's about surviving the uncertainty, it's about protecting something valuable, it's about overcoming the possibility of loss. And the longer you survive, the more emotionally invested you become. This is also why extraction shooters can create something players often describe as paranoia. You start questioning everything. Was that a footstep? Did that bush move? Did I just hear a reload? Even when nothing is happening, your brain continues scanning for threats, because uncertainty forces the brain into prediction mode. It keeps searching for information, it keeps looking for danger, it keeps preparing for possibilities. And that's why extraction shooters can feel mentally exhausting even when they are slow. Your brain never fully relaxes. It stays alert, it stays engaged, it stays ready. And all of this happens before the first bullet is fired. Because once combat begins, an entirely different system takes over, guys. A system involving adrenaline, stress hormones, fight or flight responses, tunnel vision, and decision making under pressure. And surprisingly, those ancient survival systems are exactly what makes extraction shooter games feel so intense. Imagine you're halfway into a raid, your backpack is full, you found expensive loot, you have survived multiple fights, everything is going well. Then suddenly, you hear gunshots nearby. Maybe it wasn't even aimed at you, maybe it was a fight happening in the distance, but your body reacts immediately. Your attention narrows, your heart rate increases, and for a brief moment, everything else disappears. The loot, the map, the objective. All of it fades into the background because your brain switches into survival mode. This reaction comes from something psychologists call the fight or flight response. It's one of the oldest survival mechanisms in the human body. The only difference is that your brain can't always tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. One of the key players of your brain here is something called amygdala. The amygdala acts like an alarm system and its job is very simple. Detect danger. When it believes that something important is at risk, it rapidly signals the rest of the brain and body to prepare for action. And at extraction shooter games, there are plenty of reasons for the amygdala to pay attention. You could lose valuable loot, you could lose expensive gear, you could lose progress from the last 20 minutes. Your brain recognizes those possibilities, and even though they are virtual, like it's not in real life, they still create genuine emotional responses. Researchers studying stress and decision making have found that stressful situations can significantly affect how people process information. For example, someone that's under pressure, their attention narrows. People focus more heavily on immediate threats. They become less aware of surrounding information, and they often make decisions differently than they would in calmer situations. I want you to think about this. If you have ever died in a raid and immediately thought, why did I do that? You have experienced this firsthand. Maybe you pushed a fight you shouldn't have taken. Maybe you forgot to heal. Maybe you ignored information that would have saved your life. Looking back afterward or checking the kill cam, the answer seems obvious, but during the fight, your brain was operating under pressure. And pressure changes everything. This is where adrenaline enters the picture. When the brain detects danger, it triggers the release of stress hormones designed to help you react quickly. Your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, your body becomes more alert, your reaction speed can improve, and in some situations, this can actually help performance. A moderate amount of stress can sharpen attention and increase focus. That's why some of your best plays happen during high pressure moments. Your brain is locked in on the task in front of you. But here's the trap, guys. Stress has a limit, and once that limit is crossed, performance starts moving in the opposite direction. Psychologists have known about this relationship for more than a century. It's often explained through something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. I had no idea of this if you ask me, but the idea of this is very simple. A little stress can improve performance. Too much stress can damage performance. Think about a raid where you are carrying almost nothing. You are calm, you are relaxed, you take fights confidently, your aim feels natural, your decisions are quick. Now compare that to a raid where you are carrying millions worth of loot. Every gunshot feels dangerous, every movement feels important, every decision feels like it could end the raid. Suddenly your aim feels shaky, you hesitate, you second guess yourself, and you make mistakes you normally wouldn't make. And the difference is not your skill, but the pressure. And extraction shooters are masters at creating pressure. But what's fascinating is that the pressure often has nothing to do with actual combat. Sometimes the most stressful part of a raid is the walk to extraction, even if that sounds silly. Think about it. You already survived. You already found the loot. The hard part should be over, right? But emotionally, the tension often becomes stronger. Why though? Because now there is more to lose. The more valuable your inventory becomes, the more painful the potential loss feels. And that increased fear can create more stress than the actual fight itself. This is why players sometimes make strange decisions near extraction. They become overly cautious, they hide longer than necessary, or they avoid fights they would normally win. Their decisions are no longer being driven only by logic, they are being influenced by stress and the fear of loss. But there is another interesting effect that appears during intense moments, and if you're playing FPS games, you have probably heard that before. Tunnel vision. Many players have experienced this without realizing it. You are focused on one enemy, one angle, one threat, and suddenly another player appears from somewhere you never checked. Afterward, you wonder how you missed them. The answer often isn't lack of awareness, it's the tunnel vision. Under stress, the brain prioritizes information it believes is most important. This can obviously improve focus, but it can also reduce awareness of other details, even though you know there are many places that an enemy can jump on you. In other words, your brain starts filtering information. Sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes it's exactly what gets you killed. And that's one reason extraction shooters feel mentally exhausting. Your brain is constantly switching between gathering information and responding to threats. It's performing risk analysis every few seconds. You are thinking, who's nearby? Should I push? Should I retreat? Should I loot? Should I extract? And unlike many other genres, there are meaningful consequences attached to every decision, which brings us to something many extraction shooter players notice after a long gaming session: mental fatigue. You might spend most of the time walking, looting, and listening, yet somehow you feel more exhausted than after hours of playing a traditional shooter. That's because extraction shooters demand continuous attention. Traditional multiplayer games often allow moments where consequences don't matter very much. You die, you respawn, the cycle continues, not a big deal. Extraction shooters doesn't give you that luxury. Every decision matters, every sound matters, every movement matters. And maintaining that level of attention requires energy. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about all of this is what happens afterward. Think about your most memorable raid. Not your best loot haul, not your highest kill game, your most memorable raid. Chances are it involved intense emotions like fear, stress, excitement, relief. Maybe all of them at the same time, and there is a reason for that. Research on memory consistently shows that emotionally intense experiences are often remembered more strongly than emotionally neutral ones. The why is interesting as the emotionally intense moments stick in your memory because your brain prioritizes how it felt, not what exactly happened. For example, a routine raid is forgettable. A raid where everything goes wrong but somehow works out in the end is unforgettable. That's why extraction shooters create stories. Stories they still remember years later. The raid where they survived with one bullet, the raid where they escaped with insane loot, the raid where they should have died but didn't. The stronger the emotional experience, the stronger the memory often becomes. And I'm telling you guys that extraction shooters are emotional experience machines. They create uncertainty, they create fear, they create anticipation, and they create relief. And they combine all of those emotions into a single gameplay loop. But we're still missing one piece of the puzzle, guys. Because none of this fully explains why players keep coming back. Why someone can lose everything in a raid, get frustrated, complain about the game, and then immediately queue for another raid. To understand that, we need to look at something even deeper: the psychology of variable rewards. Imagine two different games. In the first game, every time you open a container, you receive exactly the same reward. The same loot, the same value, the same outcome, every single time. Eventually, it becomes boring. Your brain quickly learns the pattern. There are no surprises, no anticipation, no excitement. Now imagine a second game. Sometimes you get nothing, sometimes you get something decent, and every once in a while you get something insane, and suddenly everything changes. Now every container matters, now every raid matters, and every decision feels important. Because the next reward could be the big one. An influential researcher named Skinner, if I pronounce his name correctly, from his experiments demonstrated that unpredictable rewards can create extremely persistent behavior. In many situations, rewards delivered unpredictably keep subjects engaged longer than rewards delivered on a fixed schedule. The brain becomes fascinated by the possibility that the next attempt might pay off. And if you didn't notice it yet, that's basically the extraction shooter genre. Every raid is a roll of a dice. Not because the game is gambling, but because the rewards are uncertain. Most raids are average, some raids are terrible, a few raids are unforgettable, and those unforgettable raids become the moments your brain focuses on. Think about this for a moment. Players rarely talk about the 10 ordinary raids they played last night. They talk about the one insane raid. The raid where they found that insane red item, the raid where they wiped an entire squad. Those rare experiences become excessively important in memory, and because they are rare, they remain exciting. If every raid were amazing, none of them would feel special. The unpredictability is what gives them value. This is where extraction shooter games becomes particularly interesting. The game combines multiple psychological systems into a single loop. You have uncertainty, you have loss aversion, you have stress, and now you have variable rewards. You never know what you will find. You never know who you will fight. You never know whether you will live richer or poorer. And because every outcome is possible, every decision feels meaningful. But there is another phenomenon that makes extraction shooters incredibly powerful. Near misses. A near miss is exactly what it sounds like. You almost succeeded. You almost extracted. You almost won, and you almost made it. And strangely enough, near misses often motivate people more than complete failures. So, you most likely keep going when you have near misses than full failures. Think about a raid where you die 30 seconds after spawning. That's frustrating for sure, but it's easy to move on. Researchers studying motivation have found that near misses can create powerful emotional reactions because they make success feel close. Close enough to taste, close enough to imagine, close enough that trying again feels worthwhile. And extraction shooters are full of near misses. Almost winning, almost surviving, almost extracting, and almost becoming greats. The word almost might be one of the most powerful words in the entire genre, because almost creates motivation. It creates unfinished business, it creates a desire to try again. But there is another reason players keep coming back. In fact, many of these systems are the same systems that make sports exciting. The problem is not the existence of these systems. The key is understanding them. Because once you understand them, you start noticing them. You start recognizing why a raid feels tense. You start recognizing why you want one more raid. You start recognizing why losing a backpack full of virtual items can feel surprisingly emotional. And when you understand psychology, you gain control over it. And you stop blaming yourself for feeling attached to pixels. Because the truth is simple, guys. Your brain isn't reacting to the items. Doesn't give a fuck about the items. It's reacting to what the items represent. And the items represent effort, time, achievement, possibility, and risk. Those things matter to your brain even when they are pixels. And that's what makes extraction shooters such an interesting genre. They are not just testing mechanical skill, they are testing human psychology. Every raid is an experiment, a battle between greed and caution. The game gives you choices, then it watches how your brain responds. Sometimes you extract, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you play perfectly and still lose, and other times you make mistakes and somehow survive. But every raid teaches you something about yourself. How much risk are you willing to take? How greedy are you? How patient are you under pressure? And maybe that's the real reason extraction shooters have become so popular. Because underneath all the weapons, gear and loot, they are really about human behavior. They are about making decisions when outcomes are uncertain. They are about protecting something valuable. They are about managing fear. And that's something humans have been doing for thousands of years. Extraction shooter games simply turns those psychological systems into a modern digital experience. So, the next time, guys, you are sitting in a raid, listening to decent gunshots, holding a backpack full of valuable loot, trying to decide whether to push your luck or head to extraction, remember this. The most important battle is not happening on the map. It's happening inside your brain.